Hi, this is Ryan Neal. I'm sure you all know my mother, the founder of Mother's Quest. On this podcast, my mom has spent countless hours talking with incredible mothers with inspiring stories. But this month, we want to highlight the fathers in our lives. I want to give a shout out to my own father, Chris, and the grandfathers David Neal and David Lieberman, who inspire me each and every day with their determination, intelligence, and their unlimited supply of love for all those around them. They shaped my life in countless ways, and I would hardly be the person I am today without them. As you listen to this episode, I invite you to think of the father or father figures in your lives. Consider forwarding this to them and tell them how much you appreciate their role in your epic life. And of course, go subscribe to the Mother's Quest podcast. Back to you, Mom.
Hi, and welcome to Mother's Quest, a podcast for moms like me ready to live our own truly epic life. I'm Julie Neal, a life and leadership coach, community builder, writer, and mom to two high-energy boys who challenge me to grow into my best self. I'll be right there. Where was I? In the months leading up to a big milestone birthday, I decided it was time to stop sidelining my dreams and realize that I'm the hero of my own journey. I knew I didn't want to do it alone, so I created this podcast to learn from other moms on their own quest, so their words of wisdom and lessons learned could help light the way for mine. I created this podcast for myself. Come along with me, and you'll find some treasures of your own. Hello and welcome to the Mother's Quest podcast. What an honor it is to bring you this episode with my own father as one of two I'm having with men on the podcast this month in honor of Father's Day. Two things sparked my interest in having my father on the show now. First, I've been noticing a desire to feel more connected to my grandmother Molla, my father's mother, who passed away years before I was born from pancreatic cancer. I wanted to hear from my dad about his experience of his mother, how she shaped him, and the ways he notices her spirit living on in us today. Related to this, I recently went to a workshop to learn about uncovering our family ancestry, and at that workshop, they discussed the power of oral histories. My dad is a storyteller, and I wanted to use this amazing platform to capture his stories and life lessons for me, for my children, and the Mother's Quest community. What follows is an exploration of my father's epic life, how his mother's passion as a voice and elocution teacher shaped him into the powerful speaker and human being he is today. The moment he fell in love with my mom at first sight when she was just 11 years old, how he built a career and a family, and a love of golf to help him cope with the effects of type 1 diabetes, and how he views love of family and the pursuit of fate as a theme that runs through it all. Before I share more about my insights and the challenge for all of us emerging from this episode, I want to introduce Vanessa Kudo, an astrologist who considers fate and what's in the stars for us as part of her exploration and practice.
Hi, I'm Vanessa Kuto, and I was honored to receive Julie's invitation to dedicate this episode where she talks with her father, and they tackle the topic of fate. My business and what I do in life is astrology, and so fate is a big topic in my own mind and in the work I do. What is fate? A little over a year ago, my father passed away, and I never had the chance to have a conversation with him about fate. He wasn't really into this sort of conversation. He was a man of action. He was a man of, asking you, are you happy with what you're doing? If you're not, go after what makes you happy. But in the work that I do, looking at people's birth charts and that whole moment of beginning one's life, inevitably, the conversation springs up in my sessions. And I often think about this myself. What is fate? What is to live? What is to pursue fate? And I think about my father. I would like to dedicate this episode to my father, Guido, because my father in his own way did not at least consciously, pursue fate. But in looking back at his life, I got to see how fate and legacy really are weaved together, as well as character. It's like a pyramid. As you pursue your purpose, you're really answering the call of fate, whatever that is for you. And that leaves an enormous legacy to those you leave behind. But it also reveals character. I'm still meditating on these topics of what it is to have a life well lived. What is it to pursue one's own fate or purpose? And so, in answer to Julie's invitation, which I'm so honored, I'd like to dedicate this episode to my father, Guido.
Thank you, Vanessa, for honoring your father, Guido, with this dedication, and for reflecting on the ways that fate, legacy, and character help us live a life of purpose. I loved reflecting on these same elements of my father's life in this conversation. I wasn't surprised that there were moments that made my dad and I laugh and cry along the way. But I was surprised by the insights that emerged for me about the ways in which my grandmother and my father's qualities live in me. I've known I'm much like my mother, but it wasn't until the end of this conversation that I realized that the seeker in me, the one who is always on a quest, comes from my father. My dad believes that fate plays a role in all of our lives, but that we must actively pursue it to fully realize it. Our challenge this month is to reflect on the moments in our lives when we chose to pursue our fate and what happened as a result. Also, to notice and seize the new opportunities and possibilities that call to us to take action today in our epic lives. In honor of Father's Day, I'd like to add one more challenge that we didn't discuss in the interview, but came to me as I was listening to my son Ryan record that little opening at the beginning. Seek out the father or father figures in your life, to share this episode with them, to tell them about how you appreciate them, but also to ask them about and record their stories, lessons, and insights that they have to pass along to this and future generations. I promise you'll learn something powerful about yourself and how to more fully live your epic life. I'm Julie Neal, and this is Mother's Quest. Hello, my father. Welcome to
Hello, my daughter.
Welcome to the Mother's Quest podcast.
It is a pleasure to be here.
I'm really honored and excited to have this conversation with you in honor of Father's Day. Ryan was joking with me earlier when he said, "Oh, you're going to have a man on the podcast." I only do this once a year, and I'm really looking forward to being able to talk with you. One of the reasons why I had this idea a few months ago, I was at a workshop about ancestry and capturing oral histories, and I realized how much I'm really wanting to do that, to learn more about my own ancestors. And in particular, I've had some curiosity about your mother, my grandmother, who I never met. So I'm excited to also start with that question and learn more about your mom. So yeah, let's start with the first question that I ask all of my guests. Tell me a little bit about your childhood and the impact that your own mother had in shaping who you are today.
My mother was an unusual mother for the time. She was a little bit more advanced than I think most women. She, for one thing, had her own business. She was what we called a drama and elocution teacher, and she would teach generally younger children how to express themselves better. And her claim to fame is one of her students actually became a famous actress. Her name was Carol Bruce, and she was the star of Showboat on Broadway. But most of my mother's students were generally children that just were interested in improving their drama abilities. And one of those students happened to be your mother, by the way.
Yes, I thought you were going to say that was your mom's claim to fame.
My claim to fame was one day where my mother gave lessons. My father was a doctor, and my mother used to give her lessons in his waiting room. And periodically there would be times when I would be in that office waiting for my mother to finish because we were headed somewhere. And I would peek through the door and I would watch your mother taking her elocution lessons. And you know what a believer in fate I am. And it was fate. And at that time, I think she was 11 and a half.
Wow. And how old were you at the time?
Well, I was 14 and a half. I'm 3 years older than she is. And a year later, because it so happened that we both spent summers in a similar, what they called in those days, the bungalow colony. And that's when we first started dating, when I was 15 and a half and she was 12 and a half.
That is amazing.
And my mother, as I said, gave these lessons. She was also very active in all kinds of charities, and she was president of the Parent Teachers Association in my public school. She was a very dynamic woman. And in fact, she tried to involve me in a music career, and she would not stop. From the ages of, I think, 6 to 11, every year we had to try a new instrument. One year it was piano. Then I think I went to violin. The next year was clarinet, saxophone, and finally I stuck on trumpet for 2 years, played in the public school orchestra, and that was the end of my music career that she wanted so badly to have me pursue. But that's the way my mother was. She was extremely active, extremely caring, but unfortunately, as you know, at age 57, she was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer and she died 6 months later.
What do you think were the biggest ways in which she shaped who you are and the way that you have approached your life?
She was constantly helping everybody. She wanted to help everybody. Mm-hmm. And in terms of pursuing your goals in life, she was extremely supportive and extremely encouraging. And I'm sure that I would not have attained some of the results in my life, but for that caring and giving from her.
So one of the things that I have always appreciated about you, and friends and family have also experienced at our various life cycle events, is what an amazing speech maker you are. I'm curious about how her being an elocution teacher, how that impacted how you are such a great storyteller and really captivate everybody when you go to share with us.
Well, I'm sure that it was because of my mother that I, in the course of my life, were in various positions where I had to be addressing a fairly large group of people. And I don't think I ever could have done it without some of the training that I didn't even know that she was probably giving me when I was growing up. But it actually amazed myself that I was able to do that in the course of my lifetime.
What are your strongest memories of her? I often talk on the podcast about something I call an epic snapshot moment, where there's like a particular memory that you hold so clearly that you can almost imagine you're back there. And it often feels like everything that matters most to you all bottled up in one moment. What memories come to you when you think of her?
Unfortunately, the memory that comes to me most is that when your mother and I, on your oldest sister's Karen's first birthday, moved to California from New York City, where we both had grown up. You know, I'm this great believer in fate, and how we happened to make the move was certainly fateful, but I was a tax attorney, and I went to work for a CPA law firm in Beverly Hills in October of 1962, and about 3 months or 4 months later, right in the middle of my first tax season in California, we were living in the San Fernando Valley. I was working in Beverly Hills, and that's when my mother got deathly ill. I would go back at that time once a month. I think once I took Karen, who wasn't even a year old yet. Oh, I'm sorry, she was about a year and a half old. And I sat there and I told my mother that as soon as tax season was over, we were moving back to New York to be with her. And she wouldn't let me do it. She made me promise that we would stay in California because we seemed to be so happy there. And I can never forget that. But again, Julie, fate because when she died, my father said he would come and visit us for Thanksgiving, which was only about 6 weeks after my mother died. And during that time, I searched all around Southern California to find out, is it possible for an unlicensed doctor to be employed? And I also got him the applications for a California medical license. But he was 60 years old at the time, and generally it's harder for older doctors to be admitted in other states. In any event, my father came and I told him what I had done, and he did fill out the application before he came for the medical license. And I did find that the Veterans Administration in Los Angeles, West Los Angeles, hired doctors for what they called their domiciliary branches. And I somehow got connected to the head of that department. He told me that it just so happened there was an opening for a doctor. That doctor would have to be placed by January 1st. And I set up an appointment for my father, not knowing if he would even keep that appointment. My father flew out from New York, went to San Diego, where he sat for the oral boards for the medical license. We came up to LA. He went for an interview at the VA. The head turned him over to his assistant doctor, who was a female doctor. She interviewed him. They offered him the job. He accepted the job on the spot, went back to New York, and in 6 weeks' time, disposed of his medical practice, their home, their apartment, and he was in LA. And as you're well aware, the woman that interviewed him subsequently became his wife of 29 more years. And if that story is not great story of fate, I don't know what is. It so happens that the California board actually admitted him to practice too, but he spent the next 20 years working at the VA. Amazing story, I think.
They are amazing stories. And I'm already noticing that some of the threads that are weaving through this episode, I think, are about the power of great love stories and also fate. So let's move a little bit more into talking about your perception of fate. So as you know, I've been saying now since I launched Mother's Quest that I'm living my epic life, where I really have stepped into this idea of being the heroine of my journey and the author of my story. I'd like to hear about in what ways you feel like you've been living your epic life and the ways that fate have been a key principle in your life.
Well, I definitely feel I've lived my epic life. It has had some twists and turns because, truthfully, I envisioned part of my epic life having 3 sons. And as you are well aware, I had 3 daughters. But looking back, I certainly would not have traded any one of those daughters for any sons. I've been blessed with 3 completely different, but extremely talented and loving daughters who have found equally outstanding husbands and have created an unbelievable 6 grandchildren for us. And the truth is, that's the happiest thing in my life. I mean, my whole life has been unbelievably fateful. The stories, Julie, well, just the fact that your mother and I married and have been married for almost 59 years. And I don't know if you know this, but back in the early days in school, they used to do what they called skipping. And by skipping, you would literally not go into the next grade, you would skip. And due to that skipping, I entered college when I was 16 and a half years old. I was already in love with your mother, who was 13 and a half years old. But the problem is all of my friends at college were 18 years old. And how could I tell my 18-year-old friends that I'm in love with a 13 and a half-year-old girl? And from that point on, it became very, very tricky. But again, just all kinds of fateful events. One of my best friends in college, we ended up introducing him to one of our friends who your mother said, "Oh, don't be ridiculous. Don't introduce them. They'll never like each other." And that's our friends, Leon and Arlene, who also now have, a wonderful family and have been married for 50-some years. Everything in my life, I think, truly was fate. The way I got into the business that I spent most of my life working at and trying to build was just an unbelievable story of a person trying to help me who turned out to be, the word is a flake, and who that person eventually became one of the wealthiest men in the country. But I got saved by somebody who was strictly a poker playing friend of mine in college, who I used to lend money. As a result, determined that he trusted me more than anyone else. And when I was in a problem, in order to try to fund the business I was trying to acquire, he comes through. The whole life has been that way, but I was so blessed to have found your mother so early in my life and to have the children that we have and then the family that we have. It's been wonderful for me, just wonderful.
And what do you feel like you're on a quest for most these days in your life?
Well, the truth is that it was not an easy business career. And as you know, in the early days, there were tax seasons when I would never see any of my family because literally from, January 15th to April 15th, I would be working day and night till all kinds of late hours. Fortunately, as you know, I was able to retire when I was 65 years old. And I am enjoying that retirement so much to not have all the stresses of that time and to be able to enjoy all of the family, even though you in particular and your family, unfortunately, we don't get to see quite as much as we'd like.
Well, I want to use that as a segue into the first guidepost in EPIC, which is E. It stands for engaged mindfully with our children, because I would say you are one of the most loving and devoted fathers and grandfathers I have witnessed. And I'd love to hear what your approach has been to build such connections and to prioritize, find so much joy in your children and your grandchildren.
The truth is, Julie, it goes way back to when I was just a little boy. As I mentioned, your mother and I actually met in this bungalow colonies outside of New York City. And for some reason, I just fell in love with little children. I was a counselor in camp. I was a camper for many years. And then I was a counselor and I became the tennis counselor at the camp. And I just thought that children of, the 3, 4, 8, 9, they were just the cutest things in the world. And I think I told your mother that in another world, I would love to have, instead of having income tax offices as franchisees, which was my business, I'd love to have nursery schools as my businesses, because I think those kids are so cute. I've loved children from an early stage of life, and I love my children and then the grandchildren. I just think it's the most wonderful thing in the world to have a relationship with those children.
One of the things that is so amazing about how you are with kids, it's just like what an almost like childish joy you have when you're with them. You can be a little bit of a tease, which sometimes our children get upset about, but I love how you just come alive when you're around them, and especially the way that you are such a great storyteller.
The storytelling may go way back to my mother.
Oh.
Well, it may be, because a lot of, certainly my personality, I think, came more from my mother than my father. My father was a very, very loving, caring person and a doctor. His patients, thought he was the world's greatest person. I guess I don't know how to explain it, but I believe it was my mother that taught me those feelings. And that's the way I feel today about people in general, but especially children.
The question that's coming for me right now that I'm feeling curious about is, in what ways you see qualities of your mother in any of your children or grandchildren?
That's an interesting question. Well, I certainly see it in my children, in different ways. I mean, Karen is, she's a fireball. And that was my mother. And the way you have such passion for life, for your family, and for what you're trying to do, building your epic life, Debbie is sort of in the middle.
The middle child.
She has such a great personality that my mother also certainly showed. I don't know, you all in my mind have parts of my mother.
Well, let's move to the next guidepost, P, which stands for passionate and purposeful. And this is the impact that we have in the world beyond our family. When you think about your life, where do you feel like you had the most impact?
Well, the only impact I had was in the people that trusted me and joined my businesses. You know, my business was what we call a conversion franchise in tax, accounting, and financial services. And by a conversion franchise, it means I offered my program only to already established, knowledgeable people in their business. And what I learned is that it was probably the hardest franchise sale in franchising. And the reason is that you're going to somebody who feels they know everything about what they're doing and is the conservative accountant who is the worst person in the world to sell anything to. So it was not easy. And I honestly feel that very few people, if they had tried, would have been successful. The reason I think I was successful is because I cared so much for the people that had the confidence in me to join the program that I did everything I could possibly do to make them succeed. And many of them showed their appreciation in a variety of ways to me. You know, that was my best satisfaction in my whole business career.
Yeah, one of the things, another observation that I have about you is that I'm not sure there's a person with more integrity, that you always just so valued people. You really are your word.
Well, it's interesting you say that, Julie, because one of the things about my business that I was so proud of is that over 20 years worth of franchising, I never had a lawsuit filed against Triple Check. I never even had a discussion. In other words, I was very happy that I was in a very tough field, which franchising is, that I was able to do it and not have people in any way think that I had taken any advantage of them. And that was one of actually the proudest moments of my business career, was the fact that people did not look upon me as trying to sell them anything or had sold them anything, but that I really did try to provide a service to help them build a more successful business. And some people did build businesses they never could have dreamt they would have been able to accomplish.
What would be your biggest words of wisdom then for me or for your grandchildren to help us as we continue to build our careers based on your experience?
Well, I think the first thing is the things that you've tried to highlight, pointing out that I believed in it. I mean, you've got to certainly have to work hard. I mean, the early years in the business, I can't imagine anyone working any harder than I did. For some reason, even when I had a whole network of offices that we owned, I thought I had to review every tax return, and there were thousands of returns that came through. But I just hope that everybody in the family, and certainly I think my daughters and son-in-laws have been achieving that, is just to find satisfaction in what they're doing and make sure that whatever their activity is or profession is, to make sure that what they put first is that they do actually deliver what they're trying to perform at. And that's all I can hope for them, is that everyone can be in a position to be providing that kind of service for other people.
Those are great words of wisdom. I'm really taking that in. And I want to ask you now about the next guidepost, I, which stands for invested in yourself. What are the ways in which you have invested in your own growth and learning and taken care of yourself and made space for the things that bring you joy in your life?
The thing that helped me most in addressing those areas is really golf. As you know, I was diagnosed diabetic when I was 35, and normally a person at that age would be what they call a type 2 diabetic, which means you're not insulin dependent. But I was insulin dependent, and diabetes became a real problem because my sugar would go up so high during work because I was under a lot of pressure. And lo and behold, I found that the one place where I was able to relax the most and have my sugar go down was on the golf course. And as a result, your mother was so nice and kind that on the Saturdays and Sundays, I would get up real early so I could get back and be with the family for most of the day. But she would have to smile and say, enjoy yourself as I went off to golf. And so golf to me has been a lifesaver. And it's not so much that I ever excelled that well. It's just, I just felt that being out in the sunshine with other people that also usually like golf, although many do to hate it based on their performance, but golf really was a savior for me over my lifetime. And it still is, as you know, when people used to ask me, so Dave, how often do you play golf? And I would look at them and think and say, well, I play every day that ends in Y. And all of a sudden their face would light up and they say, you play every single day? And as you know, in retirement, I love playing every single day. Unfortunately now, many years after my retirement, I can only say I play every other day. Golf is actually a lifesaver to me.
Yeah. And I love all the ways that you've involved the kids now in getting out on the golf course. It's one of their favorite things. We were just visiting you this weekend for Memorial Day in Palm Springs. And the boys just love going out on the golf course with you, driving the golf cart. You go fishing for balls.
Yeah, they're not yet into hitting the balls, which hopefully someday they will. But you're right. They love driving the cart and fishing for balls.
Yeah. And I bet one of the things that they love about it is being out there with you where you're so evidently happy.
That may be. And nothing makes me happier than being out there with them.
Well, we are at the next guidepost and the final one, which stands for C, connected to a strong support network. This guidepost is basically about investing in the relationships in your life so that you're not isolated or alone. So what do you feel like are the things that you've learned throughout your life that have helped you to have loving relationships? And that can include your relationship with mom.
I really think it's because I've always, and I still to this day, love people, all kinds and shape and forms. Interestingly, in the tax business and in the franchising business, I would run into whether they were male or female, whether they were people working for me as preparers. Interestingly, in the tax preparation business, I ran into a whole segment of people who basically were alcoholics, who could not abstain from drinking. However, they realized that if they could control it significantly during the income tax season, a 3-month period, and earn money there, that maybe would keep them going. And I had some extraordinary dealings with people like that. And my stepmother, the doctor that my father fell in love with at the Veterans Administration, that was her specialty. And over the years, so many of my potential employees would actually go with me to visit her so that she could try to set them on the right pattern. But I've just always loved people. And I've always loved meeting people of different kinds and problems. And that's really, I think, been the highlight of my life.
What do you think has been the secret to your relationship with mom that you've been married for so many years?
Isn't that amazing that I could fall in love with somebody at 11 and a half when she's 11 and a half years old? I look back and it's my biggest all-time fate belief is that, she's so unusual. Forgetting the fact that she was a beautiful woman and is a beautiful woman. I don't know many mothers who have a relationship with their daughters as she does with you and your sisters. Virtually very few days of the year go by without each of you calling to talk to her about every aspect of your life.
What are the qualities about mom that you love the most?
Oh, she's just phenomenal in every aspect. She has a wonderful personality. How caring she is. I can't truly.
It makes you too emotional.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I want to just say what an amazing experience it has been to be the child of a father who has so much kindness, who has so much love and respect for my mom, your wife. it really is true. I think your family and the relationships that you build with all of us, including your grandchildren, is the most important thing to you. And it's been evident my whole life. Thank you for all that you shared, Dad, and also for bringing your full emotion and heart to the conversation. There are not many dads I know who are willing to be vulnerable and so honest. I appreciate you doing that in this conversation. I also want to create a little bit of space for some of your humor. So before we close out this conversation, what is one of your most favorite stories to tell that brings laughter?
Fate-oriented stories, I guess. I've had some crazy things happen to me, Julie, that when I relate them, they're pretty humorous. I guess probably maybe number one was when I first purchased my first triple check business. And I think it was the second year, about 11 o'clock in the morning. I would wait for the postman to deliver the Wall Street Journal. I would take the Wall Street Journal and walk into the bathroom, sit there and read it for a while. And one day in mid-April, a elderly woman came to have her tax return done. She drove into the back of our parking lot and backed up, and her foot went on the accelerator. She crashed through the wall, and unbeknownst to anybody, she went in a semicircle in a vacant lot next door. And the next thing I know, sitting there on the toilet reading my Wall Street Journal, kaboom! Is a huge crash. Bricks start flying across my head. And I look down and there's the front headlight of her car nearly touching me.
Oh my
And
God.
so I was nearly in a fatal car accident while sitting on the toilet. Was that not unusual?
That's very unusual.
Very unusual. And that's only one of so many. Well, they end up being funny. One part of my responsibilities during some of the years was during tax season to go to various markets where we had franchisees and to try to appear on radio, TV stations. One day I flew into Baltimore, checked into the hotel, went to have dinner, again took the Wall Street Journal out. I ordered my dinner, I opened the paper, and within minutes, I see everybody around me jumping up in their chairs, screaming. And lo and behold, I had put the Wall Street Journal right over a little candle in the table, and my paper was on fire.
I don't think I realized how many of these stories involve the Wall Street Journal.
Oh, isn't that? I didn't realize it till I just sang that too. The next one wasn't a Wall Street Journal, but it was also a little bit embarrassing. I was on a radio show in Florida, and it was in a very heavy retired type community. And in fact, your mother was with me, and we're sitting in the waiting room. The announcer comes running through, and he says, I'm late. And they put him on, they sit him down, and he says, good morning, and my first guest is Dr. So-and-so. And doctor, what is your specialty? And the doctor says, my specialty are breasts. And the guy looks at him and says, breasts? What do you do? And he says, sometimes I make them bigger, sometimes I make them smaller. And in fact, I brought some photographs. And the next thing you know, there were photographs of breasts all over the TV screen. The announcer is going crazy and he says, stop. I can't go on with this. I'm going to fire my producer. And they quickly rush me in and say, you're the next guest. And I rush in, I sit down, and the guy is saying, this is ridiculous. And all of a sudden they say, 3, 2, 1. And the announcer now says, and my next guest is David Lieberman, president of Triple Check Tax Service, who's going to give us his tits on taxes. I don't know if you want that one in your podcast.
It's okay.
But that was pretty funny. I didn't know what to do at that point, whether to leave or shrink or what. A lot of experiences in my should have been a very quiet career.
So we're at the end of our conversation, and in a moment, it's going to be time for you to give me and anyone listening a challenge. But I feel like there's something I'm still wanting to capture about your relationship with fate and the lessons learned about that. What do you feel like I should take with me into my own life in thinking about fate?
I think that's really tied to what you referred to as a challenge. I believe that there is fate awaiting everybody. I think the major difference with everybody is that most people go through life not seeking their fate, and as a result, at some point say, well, I just never got a break in life. And I don't believe that's true. In my life, I think I got a lot of breaks, but I did a lot of seeking to find those breaks. Even starting with that, what changed everyone's life, who you and our whole family wouldn't be where we are today. When I was 24 years old, working for a big CPA firm in New York, not been looking at the New York Times every single Sunday for opportunities. And there was this tiny ad one day, Beverly Hills CPA law firm looking for a tax attorney. And I cut that out. And this is the most fateful of all of our lives, Julie. I was working a second job at that time in an office building a few blocks from my Fifth Avenue office, a company I was with, on the penthouse. And I would work till 10:30, 11 o'clock at night. I'd be tired. I want to go home to see your mother and to see our, at that time, 6-month-old Karen. And this particular Monday morning, I remember walking down the flight of stairs, pressing the elevator door opened. I wanted so badly to step in and get home. And I remembered I had cut out this little ad. Now, if I had stepped in that elevator, Julie, none of our lives that we're talking about would have even probably existed. Instead, I let the doors close, walked up the stairs. I didn't even know how to type. So I sat and pecked at a typewriter, a resume, put it in an envelope and mailed it. And if that's not the most fateful experience that affected our whole family's lives, I don't know what is. But all I'm saying is that, and thereafter in our lives, I was constantly looking and exploring. Even when I thought there was absolutely no chance that anything could matter out of what I was pursuing, I did it. And in some cases, it mattered significantly. So that's really the challenge that I would offer to everybody.
So what exactly is the challenge then? What do you want?
The challenge is never accept the fact that there's not something else waiting for you in life. Constantly pursue and have goals and have thoughts that you think are crazy, but if you're thinking about them and pursuing them, lo and behold, they may happen, because that would be your fate.
I love that story. And I know it's one of Ryan's absolute favorite stories, so he can recount. And as people listening know, because I talk about this a lot, that some of the best conversations I have with Ryan are in the car, driving to school or to basketball. And the other day, he started telling me about how much he believes in fate. And I know that comes from his conversations with you.
He's a good student.
Yeah, and he's listened so carefully to your stories that at your recent birthday party, we played this Papa Jeopardy game where there were all of these questions. And I remember he astounded everybody, including all of his cousins, that he knew the answers to every one of the questions.
I think he now probably remembers more answers than I do.
Well, I love this challenge. I'm going to add a little bit to it because I think there's also something about looking back at your life and identifying those stories, as you've done in this conversation, of those moments when we did seek and therefore find our fate. And so I'm going to reflect on what some of those stories are in my own life and commit to sharing them with my husband and my children. And so I'll invite others to do the same, and to just sort of say yes to this commitment to continuing to explore and really knowing that there is more for us out there if we're willing to open ourselves up to it. Well, the last thing that we do is end with acknowledgments, and it's a chance for both of us to share anything that we are taking away from this conversation or acknowledgments for one another. And I can go first, and then I'd like you to go. I had definitely some moments of learning or realizing things I hadn't before. First of all, I love now thinking about, as I'm trying to develop more of a relationship with my grandmother, your mom, all the ways in which her spirit are living in you in ways that I didn't realize, and in myself and my sisters. I'm so appreciating what I've known before, but being able to revisit the qualities in you that I admire so much. Your integrity and your kindness and your love of people and your love of children, and particularly the children in your family and in our lives. And then I don't think I realize that I get this quality of mine, which is that I am a seeker. I mean, the whole title of Mother's Quest is about being on the search for more meaning and living this epic life. And I didn't realize until this conversation that I got that from you. So thank you for all of that, Dad.
I love you, my child.
What do you feel like you are leaving this conversation with?
Well, right now I'm still feeling somewhat emotional because you brought up some subjects that, I really get emotional over. But I enjoy talking with you very much. And I think that you can be very helpful to the people that listen to you.
Would you close us out with the favorite family toast that you learned from your mother?
Well, the one that came to mind was not the normal family toast, which I will give you. I love her best toast was at the end of our meals, all day to cook it, now look it. Remember that one?
That's a good one.
But the one that she taught us to use at occasions was, may the most you ever wish for be the least you ever achieve.
Thank you, Dad.
Thank you, my child.
Thank you so much for coming along with me on this episode of the Mother's Quest podcast. I hope this conversation sparked something that will help you live your epic life. If you'd like to get show notes and learn more about the Mother's Quest community, head over to mothersquest.com. And while you're there, I would love it if you would follow the prompts to subscribe, leave a review, and help us spread the word. I want to end with some words to help light the way on your quest. Seize the day. Love your people. Honor your gifts. Until next time. Are you still there?
I'm here.
Yay! Okay, and you think you can hear me pretty well?
I didn't hear what you said.
Can you hear me pretty well?
I can hear you now.
Okay. All right, do you want to start?
All right, but you seem to fade.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, when you say, can you hear me now, I can hear you. But then the next thing you say fades.
Can you, let me say something else. How is it now?
That's very good.
Okay, hold on.
Okay.
Okay, you have to sit down here now.
No kidding. What a surprise.
Sit down.
Dad, you there? Hello? Dad? Is Dad still there?
You going to the bathroom?
Oh, okay. Well, he'll come back after the bathroom. Okay, now you can put your camera back on and we could do a quick debrief.
Wait, what do we do? How do I put the camera back on? Fran! Fran, dear. We need you. How do I put the camera on? Oh, the camera's on. I see you.